sweet tea or whatever you are sipping, and get cozy. Here we share and start the morning with a positive vibe. So let's reset, recharge, and reconnect right here on Cup of Cocoa and Chat. I'm Princess, host of Cup of Cocoa and Chat.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you're tuning in. Welcome to Cup of Cocoa and Chat. Whether you're driving, getting your workout in, out running errands, or just cozying up with your favorite throw blanket, I am so glad you're here. I am Princess, your host, and this is the space where we sip, share, and move through life with intention, no matter where we are. Because today we're talking about looking in the mirror and paying attention to what you see. This week's May 25th through May 31st theme for Cup of Cocoa and Chat is mirror moments, self-awareness, growth, and getting honest with yourself. And the message is this week, self-awareness isn't about being hard on yourself. It's about being honest with yourself. Sometimes growth begins when we stop pointing outward and start looking inward. This week, we're talking about recognizing our habits, triggers, strengths, blind spots, and the stories we tell ourselves so we can grow with intention. Today is Monday, May 25th, and this is episode number 47. Today's episode title is The Mirror Doesn't Lie. What is your life showing you? Okay. So, have you ever looked in a mirror before leaving the house and immediately noticed something you missed? Maybe your shirt wasn't straight. Maybe something was out of place. Mirrors have a way of showing us things we didn't notice before. And guess what? Life has mirrors too. Sometimes relationships become mirrors. Our reactions become mirrors. Our repeated struggles become mirrors. So today, our core talking points are number one, life keeps leaving clues. Number two, the things we avoid looking at. Number three, noticing your strengths too. And number four, questions worth asking yourself. Sometimes reflection is an excellent way to check in on ourselves without beating ourselves up, right? So today's Coco question is, what is your life trying to show you? What is your life trying to show you? So let's dive right in. Segment one. You know, life has a funny way of speaking to us, right? Sometimes it whispers and sometimes it taps us on the shoulder. And sometimes life stands in front of us, waving both arms, saying, hey, pay attention, right? But today I want us to talk for a moment about something I think we all experience at some point, which is life keeps leaving clues. Life keep leaving clues. So now what do, right? Because if we are honest, many of us pray for signs while ignoring patterns, right? We say, Lord, show me something. Give me a sign. Help me understand what direction I need to go. But sometimes the answer has already been showing up. And guess what? We ignored it. Sometimes it has been showing up through people, the people that come in and out of our lives. Sometimes it's been showing up through situations, right? Sometimes it's been showing up through the same frustration happening over and over again, right? So the signs are there, but are we seeing them or are we ignoring them, right? Things can be right in our face, almost touching our nose, yet somehow we still look the other way, right? Is it intentional? Are we looking the other way because we're afraid? Let's go on. And I think a part of that happens because the truth can make us uncomfortable. So when the truth makes us uncomfortable, we don't want to face what's right in front of us. Because when we receive a sign, sometimes we're excited. But when we receive a lesson, lessons require us to change something, right? And Mercedes is not going to let me be great. She's not going to let me be great. Let me shut this door. Sorry, guys. She was trying to, I already tried to record twice. So where were we? I think we ignore what's in our faces because the truth can make us uncomfortable, right? Because when we receive a sign, sometimes we're excited, but when we receive a lesson, lessons require us to change something, right? Repeated frustrations may have lessons attached to them, but because we keep turning our heads, we often miss them for sure. Tell me, have you ever noticed how sometimes you can find yourself saying things like, why does this always happen to me? Why do I keep ending up in the same situation? Why do I keep attracting the same kind of people? Why does this keep repeating? And we become frustrated, right? Because we're looking at the situation itself, but maybe the lessons is hiding underneath those situations. Sometimes we continue repeating the same patterns while expecting different results. Why is that, right? Why is that? We keep taking the same roads and wondering why we're arriving at the same destination. And we keep making the same choices and wondering why we're getting familiar results. Like this has happened before, right? But we overlook all of that. And before anybody listening starts feeling judged, this isn't me pointing fingers. Trust me, I've had my own moments where life was showing me something and I kept saying, nope, nope, that can't be it. That just can't be it, right? Because sometimes the truth isn't convenient, right? We insist that it's them, not us. It's our coworkers, not us. It's our families, not us. It's our friends, not us, right? It's the environment. Can't be us. It's everybody else. But guess what? Every once in a while, life quietly sits us down and says, baby, it might not be them. It might be something inside of you that needs attention, right? Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's avoidance. Maybe it's old hurt, right? Maybe it's a habit. Maybe it's our mindset. Maybe it's something we haven't wanted to acknowledge yet. My take on it is, what if life isn't punishing us, but is trying to teach us, right? Why do these things keep happening? Why do these things keep happening, right? Look at it as if it is not punishment, but it's teaching us a lesson. What if every what if every repeated lesson isn't there to break you, but just to wake you? What if those frustrating moments are not proof that you're failing, but something else, something bigger, that bigger picture that we often have to look at, right? What if they're invitations to just grow? What if it's an invitation just to grow and we're not paying it any attention. We're not looking at it we're not looking at it full frontal, right? So now this is where the conversation gets interesting, because once life starts holding up the mirror and leaving the clues, the next question becomes, what are we avoiding looking at? Because sometimes the issue isn't what we see. Sometimes it's what we keep refusing to see, right? So let's talk about that. The things we avoid looking at. So let's go a little deeper. So once we see the clues, we eventually have to ask ourselves a difficult question. And that is, what are we avoiding looking at, right? So we're looking in the mirror, right? We are seeing the clues. So what are we avoiding looking at? Because sometimes the issue isn't what we see. Sometimes it's what we keep refusing to see, right? I know for me personally, I would often avoid things that I thought would hurt me, right? And I'm sure this happens to a lot of us, right? You know, maybe it was having a hard conversations, right? Those are the things that I would try as a younger adult. I would always try to avoid having a hard conversation, okay? Maybe it was taking a real look at my bank account, right? Because trust me, as a young adult, I wasn't always good with money. I wasn't, right? And sometimes if I knew something had the possibility of bringing me discomfort or stress or disappointment, I would avoid it. And I think many of us do that, right? You know, many of us do that. We convince ourselves that if we don't look at it, maybe it won't feel real. I don't know where we got that idea from. I really don't. But avoiding something doesn't make it disappear. It doesn't make it disappear. Sometimes avoiding it only delays the healing. And I also found myself trying to avoid hurting other people's feelings, right? I was big on that, right? I never wanted to hurt anybody's feelings, right? Because I didn't like my feelings hurt. So, of course, I didn't like to hurt other people's feelings. And on the surface, that may sound kind, right? That sounds right? It sounds kind. It sounds good because we want to protect people, right? Even if they don't protect us, we want to protect people because we know how that feels, right? We know that feeling, right? So we want everybody to feel okay. We don't want to upset anyone, right? Because we know that feeling. But I had to learn something. Very hard lesson. Very hard lesson. In trying to protect everyone else, I wasn't protecting myself. What I was really doing was setting myself up for anxiety, setting myself up for emotional exhaustion, right? Setting myself up for depression. And anxiety and depression I would say they're siblings, right? Because they're so alike that sometimes we don't know the difference. We do not know the difference, right? You know, because I was always afraid to face emotional triggers and difficult conversations. That was my downfall, right? And maybe someone listening today can relate to that. Maybe you too are avoiding old habits that you know are unhealthy, right? Maybe you're avoiding emotional triggers because they bring up pain you don't want to revisit. I get it. I get it. I was like that, and I had to take a hard look. I had to look in the mirror and face what I see. There's a way that you can say something without hurting someone's feelings, right? There is a right way. There's a right way. Or maybe, you know, you're avoiding difficult conversations because you're afraid of how someone will respond, right? You don't know how they will respond. So you won't have that conversation, right? Because again, you're trying to protect someone else instead of it protecting you or protecting your peace, right? Maybe you're dealing with self-sabotage patterns, like we beating up on ourselves. We often do that, right? We often sabotage our own selves, right? We don't often mean it, but we do it, right? Or fear disguised as comfort. Now that one right there, fear disguised as comfort, that happens a lot. We so afraid, but we putting on that face, right? And we do that because comfort looks safe, right? Comfort looks safe. But guess what? Comfort isn't always healthy. Sometimes comfort says, stay where you are. Stay where you are when you know that situation isn't right for you, right? Or comfort says, don't try. Will talk you out of trying. Comfort sometimes will tell you, don't risk anything. Don't risk anything. Life itself is risk. Sometimes comfort will say, don't speak up, right? Because remember, fear is disguised as comfort. Sometimes it says, don't move, don't change. And before we realize it, we're sitting in places we've out, not because we couldn't move, not because we couldn't move, but because we became comfortable staying in that place. Some of us like to be stuck. And listen, this happens to the best of us. Nobody listening today is exempt from it. Because if we're not careful, these things can slowly become harmful, right? And how do you think they become harmful? Because they affect our emotions, they affect our relationships, they affect our peace, and even our physical health. Our physical health, right? Because sometimes we tell ourselves, I'm waiting for the right time. But sometimes we're not really waiting for the right time. Sometimes we're waiting because we are afraid, right? We're afraid to fall. We're afraid to hurt. We're afraid to disappoint. Afraid of what we'll discover if we finally stop running and look directly at it, right? But growth has a way of asking us to look anyway. That's how you know you're growing, when you're ready to face it. When you look in that mirror and you're looking at it and you're ready to face it, you are growing, my friend. You are growing. Okay? Now, before anybody listening starts feeling heavy, I don't want us to stay in this space of what we're doing wrong, because self-awareness isn't only about identifying flaws. The mirror doesn't just show broken places. Sometimes the mirror shows growth too. And that's what we want, right? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the things we may not be giving ourselves enough credit for, right? Segment 3, noticing your strengths too. So we're stepping out of that heavy part of the conversation, right? I just want to remind everybody of something important. Self-awareness isn't only about flaws, right? Sometimes we hear words like growth, reflection, or self-awareness, and we immediately think, okay, what am I doing wrong? What's broken, right? What do I need to fix? But self-awareness isn't just about finding cracks in yourself. Self-awareness also gives us an inside look at what we bring to the table. It gives us an opportunity to stop long enough to recognize our strengths too. Because while we are busy focusing on what still needs work, we sometimes forget to look at how far we have already come. And I want somebody listening to hear this. You're not the same person you used to be yesterday, last year, last month, a few years back, when you were younger. You're not. Think about it for a moment. You're not that same person. You're not that same person. There are things that used to completely break you that not only make you pause, there are situations that used to make you lose sleep that now you handle with more peace. You handle with more care, right? There are conversations you couldn't have before that now you're willing to sit down and work through. And that's growth. That right there is growth. There were seasons where you have felt like you were barely making it. And yet, here you are, still standing, still showing up, still trying, still believing. When we can recognize our growth and look back on where we've come from, something starts to happen inside of us, right? We 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 begin to feel accomplished, and we stop looking backward with regret and start looking forward with hope. A lot of us don't give ourselves credit for the growth. A lot of us. Because growth reminds us that if we made it through before, right, we can keep growing now. We can celebrate emotional maturity. We can acknowledge resilience, right? We start to say, you know what? I handled that better than I would have 5 years ago. Because you're not that same person, right? We start to respond differently. We start setting boundaries. We give ourselves a little grace. Sometimes we don't give a lot of grace, but we start to give ourselves grace, right? We keep going. And those things matter. Those things matter. Those are victories. Those are victories too. Mhm. Because sometimes we're so busy looking for huge changes that we miss the small signs of healing happening right in front of us, right? And here's what I want to say. Sometimes the mirror shows healing too. So it doesn't always show the brokenness in you. Sometimes it shows healing too. So look at what you see in the mirror. Face what you see in the mirror, because that's a beautiful thing. Because healing doesn't always show up with fireworks and loud announcements, right? Sometimes healing quietly shows up as peace, right? As patience, as wisdom, as choosing yourself. It shows up as responding instead of reacting. And sometimes healing looks like becoming someone you once needed, that person you prayed to be. Now, before we close out our conversation today, family, I want us to do one more thing together, because we've looked at the clues that life is showing us. We've talked about the things that we avoid, and we acknowledged our strengths. But now I want to leave you with some questions. Not questions for me to answer, questions for you to sit with, questions for you to reflect on, right? Let's just do a little self-check before we leave today. Let's get into segment 4, questions worth asking yourself. Sometimes growth doesn't begin with answers. Sometimes growth begins with asking better questions of ourselves. Questions like, what drains me, right? What drains me? What gives me peace? What gives me peace? What pattern keeps repeating? What am I avoiding, if any? You might not be avoiding anything. What am I proud of? And maybe while you're listening right now, another question is coming to mind that I haven't mentioned. Because we're all in different places in our lives. We're all carrying different experiences, different responsibilities, different struggles, different goals. And I know for me personally, a question I've been asking myself recently is, why can't I lose the weight? Right? I just went to the doctor and I'm the biggest I've ever been. Biggest I've ever been. Okay. But now listen, I wasn't asking that question of myself because I wasn't trying to lose the weight, right? I'm not beating myself up about the weight. I'm just not going to sit in that place, right? I'm not going to sit in that place because I was working. I was working with a nutritionist. I have been changing some of my eating habits, not all, but some, trying to make healthier choices, trying to understand my body better and why I am the biggest I've ever been. But to be honest, I'm 62. I've struggled with weight all my life. It's used to depress me, but it doesn't depress me any longer because I know that I can change, right? I look in the mirror and I face it. I know I can change, right? So with that, like I said, I'm trying to understand my body better. And when things weren't moving the way I hoped after doing all of that, I found myself asking the questions because I'm human. But here's what I had to learn. When you finally find the questions worth asking yourself, don't beat yourself up about the answer. We're not doing that because sometimes we ask ourselves questions and immediately start judging ourselves, right? We start saying, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get it together? Why am I struggling? Why am I not there yet? And before we realize it, we've turned reflection into criticism. And we're not doing that because self-awareness isn't supposed to become self-punishment, right? The purpose isn't to shame yourself. The purpose is to understand, because understanding gives you somewhere to grow from, okay? So maybe the answer for you and for myself isn't laziness. Maybe the answer isn't failure. Maybe the answer is stress, right? Maybe the answer is exhaustion. Maybe the answer is fear. Maybe the answer is timing, just timing. Maybe the answer is something deeper than what we see on the surface. So if you take anything from today's conversation, take this. Be honest with yourself, but be gentle with yourself too. Because growth happens a lot easier when grace is sitting at the table. Okay. So, all right, Coco family. As we close out today's conversation, I want you to sit with this. The mirror doesn't lie. The mirror doesn't lie. It doesn't. But the mirror also doesn't judge. Okay. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is awareness, because when we become aware, we become intentional and let me repeat that. Because when we become aware, we become intentional. And when we become intentional, growth has room to happen. Take a moment this week and ask yourself, what is life showing me right now? What is life showing me right now? And maybe it's showing you strength you didn't realize you had. Maybe it's showing you a lesson you've been avoiding. Maybe it's showing you healing. Or maybe it's showing you that you're growing in ways you haven't stopped long enough to even notice. Whatever it is, don't run from it. Stand tall in the mirror. Look at what you see. Don't run from it. Sit with it. Learn from it. And give yourself grace along the way. Okay? This is Cup of Cocoa and Chat. And I am Princess, your host. I want to bid you peace and blessings. I love you guys, and I mean it. See ya.